Welcome to the True Man Podcast. This is an invitation to radical reconstruction of a man's masculine heart and soul and a place of safe community where we dare to ask questions deep seated inside a man and explore ways to help you become a better man, a better son, a better dad, and a better spouse. Well, thank you for listening to the True Man Podcast today. I have a lot of conversations with men about their kids, typically their sons in particular, on how they can reach out to their son and better communicate. And I think this is a very important thing to look at because here's the reality of that question that may be floating around in your head of how do I talk with my son? If you don't do it, who will? And is what your son getting from that other person what you want them to receive? So let's talk more about that today with my guest, Don Ross. Now, Don is the founder and creator of Manhood Tribes, and he has served as a pastor and a minister leader for the past couple of decades and has led and worked with men on a wide variety of settings. And today, Don is going to help us walk through the idea of better communication with our sons. Welcome to the True Man Podcast.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Absolutely. So set this up for us. Talk about the importance of I guess really how did you kind of settle in to the idea of working with men specifically and trying to help out all us dudes that well we need the help, right?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think, it really, I have to begin with it came out of my own story as a man, which I think for most of us that are working in, men's ministry or connecting with men in some way, that's where it begins for most of us, right? It's
Yep.
out of the fact that as men, I think we have grown up in a culture and in an era where it has been confusing and difficult to figure out what it means to really be a man and to do that effectively.
Yeah.
We're presented with some ideas of manhood that I think we kind of found deficient and wanting. But then we weren't really given any alternatives that were actually satisfying. And so I think for me, that's the short version is just to say, my journey has been one of struggling to figure out what does it mean to be a man and how do I do that well? And the world has presented some options that I don't know that I've been too fond of. And even as a guy who has grown up in and around the church, I would say the church has presented some options that I've not been super fond of either. So on both sides of the equation, you get a lot of ideas about what it means to be a man that just kind of feel like, if that's what it means to be a man, I don't know that I'm really interested. And so,
Yeah.
what I kind of heard from
Buyer
guys over
beware,
and over,
right?
yeah, right. What I kind of heard from guys over and over was just the amount of confusion and struggle and frustration and in the church setting in particular, just watching men move away from the church
Yeah.
because of not really feeling like as a man they knew where they fit. And so, in that regard, I just kind of wanted to jump in and help and say, this is a journey that I've been on for myself. And it's one that I want to try to help other men with as well.
What do you find let's dive into the whole father son thing because this is just
Yeah.
so critical and I think it's probably way deeper than if somebody heard that intro um they heard me talk about a father like yourself talking to a son, but it's much deeper than that, right? So you've
Yeah.
got the father son relationship, capital F, capital S, and then you've got a father, small f, and son, small s,
Yeah.
like you and me talking to our son. And I think all of those relationships really blend together. But talk about how your confusion may be a little bit with your own masculinity and how all this plays together, how you see that kind of playing into how fathers and sons build their relationship.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I've got two sons who are both at this point teenagers. And when they were young, I just remember feeling significantly the weight on my shoulders of trying to pass on to them at some
Mm,
point, what it would mean to be a man. I just remember kind of like, okay, I'm watching our culture, I'm paying attention to our
Yeah.
culture. It's getting weirder and harder to figure out what it means to be a man in our culture. And for boys in
Yeah.
particular in the school system, it's just it's like it's hard to be a boy in the school system now. And so a lot of the ways that they are being confronted with this is what, kind of in my skin, in my body, it feels like to be a boy. They're kind of being told that's not good, or that's not welcome, or that's not needed. And I just remember watching those things as a dad and thinking, okay, like I want them to learn some things intentionally about what it means to be a man. And unfortunately, our culture is just at a place where it's not going to give those things to them, right? I don't know that that was always true of American culture or Western culture in general, but it certainly is true now. A boy is not just going to pick up from the broader culture what it means to be a man and land there with both a confidence that, yeah, that's what it means
Yeah.
to be a man, and just a real joy over the fact of like, I'm excited about being a man if that's what it means to be a man. Those things just, they're not going to add up. And so, because that's the case, I just kind of began to realize as a dad, okay, it falls on me. Maybe at this moment in our culture, it falls too much on dads. I would honestly say I think it does. We dads could really use the help of the culture around us in helping
We're
our
not
sons
equipped
become
for
men.
this kind of
Right.
thing.
Yeah. But we're kind of having to do it all on our own. I
Yeah.
don't I don't really think that's a good thing, but it is kind of the moment that we're in. And so that was where I just started to say, okay, if that's the case, then I got to really figure out some things to be able to pass on some stuff to my sons. How would I want to do that? What would I
Yeah.
want to pass on to them? And that's really kind of what started me on that journey.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, I jokingly say we're not equipped to do this,
Yeah.
but I think that that's probably a good word. Um, you know, uh, yeah, when I was growing up, I don't know that I learned things the right way. Right. I mean, most
Yeah.
kids, and I've heard this story over and over again. I mean, for example, what was your sex education? Well, we learned it from HBO or we heard about it on the
Right.
playground, right?
Yeah.
Which, may or may not be too much different than today, although the media forms have changed. I mean, not
Yeah.
every kid I knew had HBO. So, then there's that. Not
Right.
every kid I knew had videotape machines where you could dive into dad's pornography, right? And
Right.
so,
Right.
not everybody had all that stuff. Now, all you have to do is pick up your mobile phone and you have access to virtually
Yeah.
anything.
Anything.
How, how do you feel like, and we're pretty close in this, same age. How do you feel like all the media, I'm painting everything with a broad brush here a little bit, the media consumption, media availability, excuse me, um, and maybe it's working against us as dads, and maybe we're so caught up in it, we don't even realize it, right? Because we're
Yeah.
all addicted to our phones. How do you
Yeah.
feel like that is playing into maybe some of this confusion that's going on for these young kids nowadays?
Yeah, a lot, and in ways that we don't even know. So I'll give you a few examples. We honestly could probably do a whole podcast episode just on that topic. Um, but I'll give you a few examples. The obvious one is sexuality, right? Like kind of
Yeah.
as you mentioned, whether we're talking about porn or whether we're just talking about the pervasiveness of how over sexualized most media is, and even media that's aimed at children. Like it is, it's
Yeah.
just everywhere. It's everywhere, and so kids are being exposed to it at a younger and younger age. And I recently heard somebody talk about how American culture as it relates to parenting has gotten really interesting in the fact that we have become so overprotective and over concerned about safety in the physical world,
Yeah.
but we've almost turned a blind eye to protecting and keeping our kids safe in the digital world. And honestly,
Oh,
there's way more damage that can be done. It's not bumps and scrapes, that gets done in the digital world, but it is severe emotional and mental and sexual health damage that gets done in that arena, and that lasts for years and decades to come. And I think as parents, like that can all sound really scary and overwhelming. Our kids are going to be far more comfortable and familiar with technology and just,
Yeah.
devices than we will as parents. And so it can feel really overwhelming to kind of jump in and figure out how do I create some protection for my kids in this space. But I mean, I think as parents and as dads especially, who probably from our own mistakes and our own experiences, we are at least familiar with what's available out there, right? Most
Right. Yeah.
dads,
Yeah.
whether they want to admit it or not, can tell you, I know how dangerous this phone is because it has been a danger for me. And so, in light of that, I think we just, we need to be able to kind of enter into that world with our kids and say, hey, I need to put up some guardrails for you. And it's not because I'm trying to harm you or take away your fun or make you into an outcast among your peers. It's because, I wouldn't send you to school with a gun where you could harm someone else or
Right.
harm yourself. So why would we do that with a phone? But we do it. Like there's still the same kinds of damage that can be done. And if we don't enter in and kind of teach our kids how to, have some protection in that area and protect them ourselves, we're doing them a real disservice. So
Uh,
that's
he-
one, obviously the whole area of sexuality.
yeah. Here's a tricky question. And I get what you're saying on this. And I think this is a challenge for a lot of parents. If you and I say, hey, we're going to put some guardrails on this thing, that's one thing. But then they've got 10 other friends that don't have the guardrails.
Right.
And so, how do we maneuver around that?
Yeah. So, it's the same way that parents have had to do it for generations, and we just have to be more intentional about it now. Like it's not just about setting up guardrails because kids will find ways around those if they want to. It's helping to kind of
Yeah.
shepherd their hearts, and teaching
Oh,
them of like, hey, it's the analogy of like a knife, right? A knife is a dangerous tool. It can be used for things that are really good or really bad, but it is inherently dangerous. And you have to teach them the same thing about the phone. Like, look, there are things that this can be used for that are really good, but it also can be used for things that are really bad. And let me begin to tell you about why some of these, sexual kinds of things that you might encounter in this phone are really bad. This is why they would harm you. They're going to excite you. They're going to entice you. You're going to find them pleasurable, even maybe, depending on the age that you need to talk to your kid about this. But just being honest of the fact that, like, just because it's enticing you doesn't mean it's good. In fact, it's going to mean that it's really bad. And here's why. And here's what you need to do when you encounter those things. And here's why. Like, I don't want you to use something that's going to do damage to yourself. So, again, it's shepherding your kid's heart, helping them to try to understand the why behind the guardrails that you're putting up. Hey, I'm putting these up for your protection, but let's talk about why I'm doing this. What's the risk here? What are the dangers? What could this do to you? What could it do to your friends? All of those kinds of things. It's good to talk to your kids about that kind of stuff. It's good to have those very real and honest conversations because it helps them
yeah.
be able to not just make behavioral adjustments, but learn to be wise. It helps them to learn to have wisdom in those kinds of situations. And that's, I think, what we as parents hope for with all of our kids, right? Not just that they would follow our rules, but they would learn to make good decisions for themselves. And that's really what wisdom is all about. So if we don't equip them with wisdom, we don't have any hope of them actually applying it when they need it.
Wow. Yeah, I think there are probably a lot of dads that listen to this right now and they're like, man, I got to record that. That was
Yeah.
really good. That was really good. No, I mean, truthfully, and I mean, you kind of set the stage there as you were telling that. And I felt like I was in the midst of a story, really taking on a lot of great information. And I think that that's so important. I think one of the challenges we have with all these conversations we need to have with our kids nowadays is that, um, we need to sit down and say, hey, I just want to, neither one of us want to have this conversation. However,
Right.
we have to have this conversation because I
Yeah.
care about you. I care about you. And I love the approach of saying, hey, I care about your heart. And here's how your
Right.
heart can be injured. And here's how your heart can feel love. And, I got to say, as men, I don't think we get in our heads too much, and we have these cognitive conversations. But having this conversation about the heart with our kids, I think, is incredibly important as we approach all these subjects because the self awareness level, at least I've seen with my kids, right, and their friends. The self-awareness level, a lot of the kids nowadays compared to when I grew up, I think is really high.
Yeah.
Now,
They've
may
got,
not
um
may not
they've
always
got
be the
some
way
real
I would.
emotional social awareness because those kinds of things get talked about in their environments way more than they ever did, for us, for our generation and the generations before us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my experience has been they have way less like social skills, like they they've got some emotional
Yeah, it's a
self-awareness.
weird combination,
Yeah,
isn't it?
but the ability to translate that into relating well to others, I think is lagging behind. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's right. There's self-awareness in texting is really high, right? That's where it is. But the interpersonal skills, yeah, that really is interesting that you would say it that way. And I agree with you 100% on that. I think what's interesting about that is sitting down with our children and having these conversations. We're teaching them, essentially modeling with them how these conversations should be had. In other
Yeah.
words, it shouldn't come you shouldn't be texting your child and having these conversations. I'm not
Right.
saying
Right.
people are doing, I'm sure some people are doing that, but I mean, we really should be modeling these communication behaviors. They're important.
Yeah. Yeah,
And it's
absolutely. Yeah. And you had mentioned kind of like, all the ways that like phone and digital technology are really kind of influencing our kids. And I think that word that you talked about, modeling, is actually one of the biggest ones that we as parents maybe aren't paying attention to enough. Like I think a lot of us
mm,
are aware of the dangers of sexuality and pornography and all of that that's present on the internet. But I think one of the ones that we're really not paying attention to as much is just what is being modeled to our kids from the media that they are consuming. So, one of the things I'll give you an example that I have really
wow.
noticed with my two boys is the difference in what I will call sportsmanship in this generation as opposed to previous generations. So, in
Ooh.
this day and age, and I'm not going to name any particular professional leagues here, but it's not hard to find examples. If
Yeah.
you look at short clips of sports videos on the internet these days, the culture of it is all about how you as an athlete can humiliate the other athletes around you, right? How you can slam on them, how you can dunk on them, how you can break their ankles, how I mean, you name it. And the teenagers have all kinds of, slang terms for all of it. But the point is like what used to be true in sports, which was that, hey, we're all going to compete and we're all after winning, but we're going to treat one another with respect. Like that idea has just kind of gone out the window. These days it is really all about how can I shame my opponent the most by showing off my skills. That's really that's what sportsmanship has become. So that idea of, modeling, they are picking up every day from things that we as parents would consider, pretty much benign. Like this is not dangerous for my kid to be watching a football or a basketball video for the most part. Like that's not something that we as parents are going to be concerned about. But what they're picking up in that modeling is this sense of what it looks like, especially for boys, what it looks
Yeah.
like to be a man is to shame and humiliate the other men around me. Now, they're not necessarily going to put it in those terms. If you ask your son, do you think that's what it means to be a man? No. But when you watch them get out on the field and play, or when they're just in the neighborhood playing sports with their buddies, that's how they act. That's how they're going to treat the other boys around them, is because that's what they've learned. That's what's been modeled to them. And that's what they're understanding is normal. So it's those kinds of things that I think are maybe just as dangerous for what it means to be a man in our culture that they're picking up on. And we're not providing alternatives and speaking into those things in a way that helps them to understand, hey, there's actually better models for being a man than that. And I want to show you a way towards that.
Yeah. Yeah, I got some athletes that were around when I was a kid that I would much prefer.
Yeah,
That is such a great example. The whole idea of sportsmanship. In fact, it's a rare. You just don't even hear that word tossed around as much as it
right.
used to be. And to your point, you used to see things at the professional level, and they used to just kind of stick there, right? it's definitely filtered down to college, and I've
Yeah.
definitely, without question, seen it seep down into the high schools,
Yeah.
even some of the junior high. Now, I'm not as exposed as I used to be, but I can certainly go out and see the videos of things, and I think some of it, I remember when I was in high school, if you got a call and somebody said you need to go to the principal's office, the fear of death that came over you, like, oh man, this is there, I'm being disciplined for something. What, like,
Right.
and your mind's
Right.
racing, you're going, well, what is it? These kids do not, and I'm painting a really broad brush here. So, and I don't mean to do that, but a lot of these kids don't fear authority anymore.
Yeah.
And to your point, I think part of it is they see their role models, and I use that term really loosely. They see athletes. Let's expand that and say they see politicians that are not their value system.
Yeah.
Could be questioned, right?
Yeah. Well,
And
they act like adolescents and they treat other people the way that adolescents do, you know. So why would our teenage adolescents, why would we be surprised
yeah,
that they begin to think that that's normal, you know? So yeah, I hear what you're saying.
yeah, we got to be careful with that because the a lot of the behaviors that we see, they're not normal. Some of the things
Right.
that we see
Right.
now, I was
Yeah.
incredibly competitive when I was around athletics, and maybe to a fault. I'm sure I'm 100%. I 100% know I was not a good loser.
Well,
Which is
none of
kind of,
us were 100% of the time, right? But
well,
usually we had dads or coaches around us that were saying, "Hey, check that attitude. Like losing is hard, but you don't get to take that in a way where you mistreat other people." And nowadays, it's
yeah,
kind of like expected that when you lose, that your attitude should be negative and that you should hold a grudge against the people that you lost to. Like, and so that's what I'm just saying. It's like those kinds of
yeah,
things,
yeah.
that kind of modeling is really changing the way that our boys are learning to be men from the culture around them.
So as fathers, how can we better model for our children?
Yes. Okay. Great question. So this is really that's the question that I got started in, and that's where I just kind of had to say I kind of started down a path of just saying what's out there, what's available that
Yeah.
might help me be able to help my sons grow into manhood. And I'll be honest with you, there was not a lot. There were some resources that were things like books, that were more geared towards adult men. They weren't really geared towards teenagers or early teens. And so because for the most part boys at that age don't really read books anyway, so
Yep.
it made sense that there wasn't that kind of stuff, but there were some other kind of programs that were available, but as I looked into them I was kind of like this comes from a different age or a different era, and I'm not sure is quite as relevant to where boys are at today. So it kind of led me to saying like, okay, if I'm gonna do this thing, I'm just gonna do it myself. I'm gonna try to figure out how to do something on my own. And so what I kind of came up with was that there's really three things that a boy needs to be able to advance into manhood. The first is that he needs a clear vision of what it means to be a man. The second is that he needs opportunities to practice being a man. And then the third is that he needs a dedicated season to advance from boyhood to manhood. And a lot of times we call that like a rite of passage,
Right.
but it is some kind of actual opportunity where he takes what he has seen and learned and puts it into practice and is able to kind of be verified and validated by the community of men around him to say that he is welcome, he belongs, he is a man, he is seen as a man, and to kind of know internally that that is true of him in his identity.
Yeah. Now the Jewish community has done a great job on this. Not all religions have done a great job with this. If you ask, 10 guys, and I've been in rooms where we've asked this question, and hardly anybody can raise their hand and go, "Oh, I remember a specific point in my
Yeah.
life where,
Yeah. Most
I
of us in the Western world haven't gotten that at all in, centuries.
talk more about these three um ideas,
Yeah.
starting with having that clear vision. I think this is really
Yeah.
Really important.
So at Manhood Tribes, I work with an idea that I call the 5 marks of manhood. And so this is kind of our idea of what it means to have a clear vision of being a man.
Hmm.
We use these 5 things to say these are the traits that all men should possess in order to demonstrate what it means to be a man. They don't make you a good man or a bad man, so they're kind of morally neutral, but all men should possess them. And the way that you live them out is going to affect what kind of a man you are. But just because you might be a bad man doesn't make you not a man. Right. So
Yeah.
we need to
Yeah.
understand what makes a man first, and then figure out how to do those things well. So the 5 marks of manhood are strength, courage, skill, honor, and allegiance. And if you go through all of those, you begin to understand if I as a man can possess all of these things, I actually can learn to grow in every one of them. And that's really important for both our sons, but also for us as adult men today who, struggle in a lot of ways with the feeling of, am I a man? Like, am I really manly? Like, how would I even know if I am? Like, what does that even mean? Having some kind of clear markers of being able to say, this is what it means to be a man, but also you can get better at any of those things. You're not stuck at whatever place on the, manly spectrum that you are at the moment. Like
Yeah.
you can advance and so can your son. And that's really kind of the biggest thing that's important about it, is to say all of these things are things that you can grow in. And as a man, you should be growing in them. You should be devoted to those things and getting better at them. So strength, courage, skill, honor, and allegiance.
Now, in those 5 areas, do you feel like that it's important for a man to take those things on before he takes it back to his son? I mean, some guys need to do a little work.
Yeah. I think it's up to every man to kind of figure that out for himself. A man
Aha.
might look
Yeah.
at that list and say, I'm really failing at a few of these things. And before I can actually start to hand something off to my son, I need to shore up some things as it relates to honor, or as it relates to courage, whatever it might be. And if that's the case, then so be it. But I also don't want any man to feel like because he's not doing well at something that means that he isn't a man. And doesn't have something to pass on to his son. Every man has something to pass on to his son. And it might just be the reality of saying to his son, hey, I'm going to grow in this and learn in this along with you. Like this was something that my dad or other men in my life didn't do
Yeah.
for me as well. But I really want to do it for you. And so we're going to kind of go on this journey together of figuring out how we grow and get better in these areas, because I want that to be true of you, but I need it to be true of me as well.
Well, yeah, and I commonly say, and I think this is important in a lot of the groups that I'm a part of. We talk about this quite a bit. Hey, I'm under construction. I don't know what the finished product looks like. I don't
Yeah.
know if there is a finished product. I'm in construction. I'm always trying to figure
Yeah,
out,
that's right.
how to work to get better my best, as I like to say, better my best and get
Yeah.
get better. Yeah, I recently watched a Blue Angels documentary. And I believe it was on Amazon Prime. And if I strongly encourage everybody to watch it, because the Blue Angels are like, woo, my
Yeah, they're
mind-boggling
so cool.
people.
Yeah.
But the whole point of one of the things that they were talking about is we're striving for perfection, because right in there doing what they're doing, they're in the air, right? If
Right.
something goes sideways, it could result in death,
Yeah,
you
disastrous.
know.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But the idea is when they're in training, which is what we're talking about here. We're in
Yeah.
training,
Yeah.
we're in construction. When they're in training, the idea is perfection, knowing that they can't achieve it. But ultimately that's the goal, is
Right.
to get
Right.
as close. And so, it's you can learn lessons from organizations like that, and we can walk away as fathers going, well, yeah, the goal is perfection, but I know I can't get there. And I think it's important to know that you
Yeah.
can't get there, because
Yeah.
otherwise you become yeah, your humility might be a little out of whack.
That's
uh
true. Yeah.
you know
But yeah, I think to your point, is it's just the idea that like we're never going to achieve perfection, but we can always continue to be challenging ourselves to get better, and as men, that's what we should do. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what that second point is about, is that boys need opportunities to practice what it means to be a man. And so the way that we do that through Manhood Tribes, but also through a part of this rite of passage that we create for fathers and sons, is we create what we call manhood challenges. And so they are just kind of like simple, straightforward, usually brief tasks that you or your son or together you could do to kind of test yourself in one of those 5 marks of manhood. So you might say, I really feel like I need to grow in the area of strength. Like as a man, that's just not something that I've prioritized very well in my adult years. Or you might be looking at your son who's kind of just beginning to come into his strength and is
Mhm.
saying, Dad, I want to get stronger. Or you're hearing him kind of use that, language in some different ways. And so, you just think we need a strength challenge. And so it might be something simple like, let's see how many push-ups we can do in 60 seconds. And we're going to keep practicing that over the course of the month and
Mhm.
see how much better we can get in 30 days, and kind of retest at the end of the month and see where you've gotten. It's a really simple strength challenge, but it allows you to do a couple things. It allows you to get better at it. It allows you to see that you are capable of getting better. And that's super important, and especially really important for our sons who are at the age where they need some wins, right? They need
Yeah.
some things to help them see, I can improve. This isn't going to be impossible. This is within my reach if I will put in some effort. And so, just some things to be able to win at. Watching himself get stronger over the course of the month is a really great way to build a son's confidence in himself, but also to recognize that, like, manhood is something that I can do. I can be a man because I can work towards it and get better at it. So, you can build manhood challenges around any of those 5 aspects. We love doing allegiance challenges. That's a really good one for us that gets involved. I say us, for me and my sons, that can get involved in both like how they relate to their parents, how they relate to their teachers, even how they relate to God. All of that has to do with allegiance. And so just, creating some challenges around those things are really great ways to help a young man grow in his skills and abilities as a man, and to see that, like, hey, these things are connected to manhood too. It's not all about sex and six packs, right? I mean, it's not just those things the way that the internet might be telling you that it is. It's a lot more to it than that. And in fact, it's a lot better than that. But you need some other men to kind of show you how that's the case.
Yeah, and I think exactly, and I think that that creates a level of accountability and just working together. And I think that I think that's important for us to introduce, particularly to our sons, because they need to know that. I mean, there's hey, when guys get together, it's okay. It's okay for guys to get together and do these
Yeah.
things and help each
Yeah.
other. Achieve accountability um, and have these vulnerable conversations. Maybe you could
Yep.
talk about that a little bit, because that's really what we're talking about here. And I think that probably what strikes fear in a lot of guys' hearts, is to have a vulnerable conversation, but not only with their children, but maybe even their
Yeah.
wife. So,
Yeah.
maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it ties into kind of where we're talking in a couple ways. One, in the 5 marks of manhood, that kind of falls within the realm of what we call honor. So
Mhm.
honor, I think, is actually one of is kind of a misunderstood word in our world today now. I think the
Boy, and
military
how.
still. Yeah, I think the military kind of mostly still gets it right. But broadly, we tend to use the word honor to mean something more like character or integrity.
Mhm.
But the older kind of idea of the word honor is just that you are doing right by your peers. Like you are sharing and exhibiting the values that the people around you hold to be dear. And so you're doing right by them. You're taking care of them. You've got their backs. They've got your backs. You're fighting for one another in all the ways that really matter. And you're upholding the things that kind of within your tribe are considered to be important. That's what honor is really all about.
Mhm.
And so, in order to do that, one of the things that we talk about within the world of manhood tribes is that in order to really have honor, you have to develop trust with the men around you. And to do that, you have to do what we call get naked. So that's where the idea of vulnerability really comes into play, is that we would say,
Better
you have
clarify
really,
that.
yeah, right. I'll let you interpret it how you wish. I think multiple applications could work here. Um, yeah, it basically just means you really need to kind of strip down to the purest version of yourself.
Right.
Let
Right.
some guys around you get to know who you really are and what's going on under the
Mhm.
hood, right? So,
Yep.
having vulnerable, honest, excuse me, honest conversations about who you are, the things that you're struggling with, the things that are impacting you, the things that you hope and desire, your past and the way that it shaped you, all of those kinds of things are important, not just to acknowledge, but for other guys to know about you as well. You're never going to be the kind of man that you want to be as long as your life and your story are hidden. We have, I think, as men in our culture,
Boy,
we have for
that's
far too long
mm,
valued isolation and said
yeah.
that isolation and independence is the way to exhibit manhood. That's actually not been the way of manhood for most of history and in most cultures. It's really only kind of been here in the West in the last, 150 years or so. I think war had a significant impact on that, and the amount of trauma that men went through in
Yeah.
war, that they
No
just had a
question.
hard time being able to be honest about what was actually going on under the surface. And so, we had these kind of lone ranger figures that popped up in our culture and exhibited manhood. But the thing that was most true of them is that they looked like they didn't need anybody. And that's just never been the way of men. Men have always lived in tribal communities and small groups and troops and, communities, like whatever you want to call it. That is the way that men have operated. And we really need to get back to that. If we want to both
Yeah.
see ourselves excel as men and see our sons excel as men, we've got to learn how to build small tribes of really good relationships where we're having those kind of honest conversations and being known in the company of other men.
It's so many great points there. One of the things that, and I don't give Hollywood credit for a lot of things, but I'll give them credit for this. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed from an historic standpoint is going back and watching some of these movies that have been created. Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers was an
Hmm.
absolutely epic series that I
Yeah.
encourage people to watch, and really learning what did these guys go through and what did
Yeah.
they see. I mean, they saw some things I hope to never see.
Yeah.
But the point of all of that is it gives me an idea of why do we have generations of men that have really isolated themselves, because
Yeah.
a lot of these guys have seen things. If if they survived it, they saw some things they don't want to talk about.
Right.
And
Yeah.
really, who could blame them? When you go back and you look at some of these movies that are many of which are really really good, but I think what's happened is, and really generationally now, we don't have as many men that have fought.
Right.
We've got the fathers now that were, my dad is now he's listening to this. Hey, Dad, how's it going? So is in his 80s. So you've got these Vietnam veterans. Really, you know so many of them, are up in age. The World War II guys, I mean, there's not very many of those left,
Right.
and they're really national treasures. But what they didn't bring back with them in so many cases were the stories, because they didn't know
Right.
what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that what I'm coming to understanding is for my own life is that we all have a story. And if you don't tell it, it'll die with you.
Yeah.
And you really want to pass that on to your children, because there's so much wisdom.
That's right. Yeah.
Eh,
So that actually was kind of the impetus for me of saying, uh, what do I want to create for my sons? And that's where I
Mm.
came up with this thing that we call First Tribe, which is our rite of passage program for Manhood Tribes. So we do a few things with that you've kind of hit on as a way of trying to really help young men. One is that it's not just a father and son program, it's a fathers and sons program. So it is meant to be done as a group of dads and sons together because young men need a community of older
Oh
men,
yeah.
not
Mhm.
only to welcome them into manhood, but to model for them what is manhood all about. Yes, as a son, you need to learn from your dad, but you really need to learn from a lot more men than just your dad in order to
Right.
be able to confidently step into what, the kind of vision of manhood that we're trying to create. One man, even if he's dad and he's, the best dad ever, is not going to be enough to counter the messages that they're getting from the culture. And so that's where a community of men really does help. So we do that, but then also I call it First Tribe Path to Manhood, and I call it that because it really is about what is the story that we are inviting these young men into. What is it, that's saying like here's how your story fits into a larger story so that you as a man have some context of what being a man is really all about. So on this path to manhood, we ask some big questions. We try to talk about who am I? Who is God? What am I meant for? And do I have what it takes? We feel like
Mhm.
these are questions that, these young men, and it's kind of geared towards kids that are ages 11 to 15. They may not be able to put those questions into those words, but they are asking them in their hearts and even in their lives, in the ways that they're living, the ways that they're interacting with their parents, their other authority figures, their peers. You see those kinds of things coming out in the way that they are exploring, the
Yeah.
way that they're testing boundaries. All of those questions are present for young men at that age. And so we're trying to say, let's give you some answers to those things that help you locate yourself in a bigger story that's not just about you. A story that's just about you is too small, and you're going to make a mess of it because you're not meant to be the point of the story. And so that's what we try to do is just say this path to manhood is meant to help you find who you are and to join in a company of men who are adventuring along the same path that you are meant to be on.
I love that word, locate yourself. Locate.
Yeah.
That is a really, really good word. Because if you don't know where you're located in this day and age, you could just get swallowed up
Oh
so
yeah,
easy.
I think lost is probably one of the most common descriptors of men in our culture right now. The number of men who just feel lost,
Yeah.
who don't have a place, who don't have a connection point that makes them feel like this is where I belong or this is how I know who I am. It is the nature of I think what the digital world has kind of done to us at the moment. But we as men haven't done a good enough job of helping other men around us and certainly our sons to be able to kind of find our way back from isolation. And so that's one of the big reasons that I
Yeah.
wanted to say if I'm going to do this thing, it's not just going to be me and my boys. Like it's got to be other men and their sons, all of us doing it together. I'm so glad that we have done it that way. It has really made for some amazing transformational stories of dads and sons who have gone through First Tribe together. But I really think it's just necessary. I
Yeah.
think it is absolutely
Yeah.
necessary in our world right now for men to enter into community with other men in order to recover what manhood is really all about.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Um, so much great information you brought our way today, Don. Tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, how they can get more information about Manhood Tribes. And of course, we're going to put all this information in the show notes, but tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, so I've actually got a cool free download for your guys that are listening that are dads of sons. It's called the Dad Son Challenge, and you can go find it at manhoodtribes.com/challenge. And it's a download, it's a free download, and it is 10 manly activities for you and your son to do together. So it's an easy, kind of, fun way of being able to connect with your son, but also to help kind of begin talking about and doing some things around these 5 marks of manhood that I mentioned on the show today. It will also kind of get you into our Manhood Tribes orbit so you can start to learn more about, who we are and what we do and what's available to you as a guy. So
Well,
yeah,
there you go.
manhoodtribes.com/challenge is where you can go to download it.
Go grab that. You'll never regret it. as a father of soon to be 22-year-old now, where did the time go? That's exactly what you say. You're like, where did the time go? You don't get the time back. Now's the time to act. Start doing stuff, get active with your children because, before you know it, they're out of the house and gone. And then
Yeah.
you don't get that time back. You don't get that time back. Don, thank you so much for being on the True Man podcast. I appreciated talking with you today. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for the opportunity. It's been a real treat.
All right. Take care.